With 2022 coming to a close, I thought it would be a great time to rank my top 10 favorite horror films that released in 2022. Keep in mind, these are films that released in the United States in 2022. Some of these movies came out at like film festivals the year before. I think that only affects like one movie on this list, but just keep that in mind because some people might look up the movie and be like, wait, it came out in 2021, but no, release date in the United States in 2022. Starting off with some honorable mentions because there were a ton of incredible horror films that released this year. So first of all, I have Hellraiser, the Hellraiser reboot. I thought this was pretty good. It just didn't crack the top 10. I didn't really have that high thoughts on it. I just thought it was a pretty solid reboot. I just watched the original Hellraiser shortly before watching this one. I actually did it on the channel, and it wasn't as good as the original, but it was certainly a worthy reboot. Like, I think it definitely justified its existence. It's different enough from the original to separate it, but not too different to the point where it doesn't feel like a Hellraiser movie. I really like the Cenobites in it. I just, a lot of awesome stuff about this film. Another one would be X. I liked this movie a lot when I first watched it, but it kind of just went lower and lower as time went on a little bit. It's good, it's a solid slasher, it's just, I just don't think it's amazing. Bones and All is one I literally just watched yesterday. It's pretty good. It involves two main characters who like to eat people, and that's pretty much all you need to know. But it's more of a romance than it is a horror film, so it's kind of hard to include it on this list, but I don't think it's better than any of the movies on this list anyways. Bodies, 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 I think was incredibly entertaining, and I think for certain groups of people it's going to be very incredible. But for me personally, I just didn't think it was that special enough to be in the top 10, although I definitely would recommend it. And lastly, I wanted to include Prey as an honorable mention. But here's the thing about Prey. If I were to count this as a horror film, it would be in the top 10. The thing is, though, I don't really count it as a horror film. I consider it more of an action sci-fi type film. So I just didn't want to put it in the ranking. I understand a lot of people do count it as a horror film, and you can count whatever you want as a horror film. It's completely up to you. I just personally don't count it as one. If I were to, it would probably be at like the number 7 or 8 spot on the list, but I just want to keep it as an honorable mention, just let you guys know that I did love the movie. I just don't really consider it a horror film. With that being said, let's get into the top 10, starting off in the number 10 spot with Jordan Peele's Nope. So Jordan Peele, I only watched his other two films just this past year, both on this channel. That includes Get Out and Us, and I thought they were pretty good films, both of them. So this one, I had some high expectations just based off of those two prior films, and I definitely think it had a lot of great moments to it. But the third act is the thing that I think brought this film down the most. I was honestly gonna give this like a 5 out of 5 at certain points in the film. Like halfway through it, I was like, this is incredible, this is amazing. I just don't think it stuck the landing. I don't think it stuck the landing enough for me to consider it an all-around perfect movie or even that great of a movie, but it's definitely a good movie. I enjoyed it quite a bit. The cinematography is out of this world, and just a lot of the shots he's able to execute is amazing, which is kind of funny because a big part of the film revolves around trying to get the perfect shot. That's one of the main characters is like a director, and he wants to get this perfect shot of this UFO thing, and ironically, they also get a lot of great shots just for this movie itself. Everything with the chimpanzee revolving around Steven Yeun's character was really dark and really crazy, so those scenes were probably some of my favorite parts of the movie. I honestly wouldn't have minded just a full movie about that specific story. But yeah, it was a very creepy movie, a lot of great horror elements to it. I just thought the third act was a bit weak. It had some character decisions that I thought were a bit mind-boggling, and ultimately was not a conclusion that I would have loved for it. In the number 9 spot, I have Scream. So I guess you can call it Scream 5. This was a pretty solid Scream film, to be honest. Like, I wasn't sure what to expect. I just watched the first Scream movies just last year, all 4 of them, and it became one of my favorite horror franchises. So going into this, I was expecting it to be at least a decent film, and it was. It was pretty good. It had a lot of amazing kills, which surprised me because Scream movies are not known for their kills, but they had a lot of actual good kills in this one. Good characters as well. The new cast I actually like quite a bit. A lot of people don't like the main actress. Her character's name was Sam. A lot of people say her acting was weak, and I didn't really have an issue with that when I first watched it. I'm sure if I rewatched it with that idea in my head, I might start to see some of the flaws, but at least on my first watch, it was definitely not a flaw for the film. I actually enjoyed the characters quite a bit. You also had Tara, played by Jenna Ortega, and she was a great new character. But I will say one of my biggest issues with the film is how they utilize the legacy characters, that being Sydney, Gale, and Dewey. I was not a big fan of that. I don't think they used them enough, and when they did use them, I don't think it was in the way that I kind of would prefer them to be used. It almost reminded me of the Star Wars sequels, where like, yeah, you have the legacy characters there, but they're not being used in ways that I want them to be used in. They're not really together either for like any of the films, so I thought that was a bit of a disappointment. And the killer motivation at the end, although I liked the reveal, it was definitely shocking, it was not predictable at all, I didn't like the motivation that much. And all the other Scream films have fantastic motivations that are very interesting. This one, I was just kind of like, okay, I understand what they're going for, but it's not that interesting. Number 8, I'm going to go with Orphan First Kill. This surprised me because it's a prequel to a story that doesn't really have much story to tell. Like, when you really think about it, because the first film has some backstory to Esther, and we kind of learn most of it though. And it's not anything that I felt like I needed to see in a film, because I wasn't expecting any new twists or turns with it. I was just expecting her to go to this new family and kill all of them, and that was gonna be it. But the twist they implement into this story was so great, it completely changed my thought on this as a prequel, and it makes it work. And to add on top of that, the movie's incredibly impressive to begin with, because you're taking this character, played by Isabel Fuhrman, which, great actress by the way, this is the only thing I've ever seen her in, and she's great in it. She's now 10 years older than she was in the original, but they were able to de-age her to make her look younger than she was in that original. I don't know how they did it. It was incredibly impressive, but you gotta give them props there. And it's actually just overall a pretty good film. It's not better than the original, but it's pretty good. There's a lot of great kills to it. There's a lot of scary moments with Esther. There's a lot of cool uses of the glow-in-the-dark drawings she makes. They do a little bit of that with the first film as well, but they do even more with it in this one, and I think it's just really cool. And although, like I said, it's not better than the first one, it's definitely a worthy prequel. The number 7 spot is going to be Watcher. So this film I just watched recently as well, and it was a very surprising film, because I've seen so many movies like this, the same exact concept where you have a woman who moves into a new town, or in this case a new country, and she doesn't know anybody around there, but then she starts to notice one of her neighbors is kind of spying on her a little bit, and she starts to get worried and paranoid because this person is watching her. And eventually she starts to notice some creepy things about this person. Maybe he's a serial killer, and in this case, there was a serial killer in the area. So she had these suspicions, maybe this guy is that serial killer. And the whole time you're kind of just going back and forth on whether or not she's right about this guy being that serial killer. And I really like how they turn her into a stalker at certain points, because, you know, she's so paranoid of this guy stalking her that she starts to stalk him to try to find more information about him. And it's really cool how they do that back and forth. It's definitely a slow burning film. You're not gonna get your satisfying answers until the very end. Like, I'll be honest, I was not really thinking that positively about this film during it, but once you got to the end, that's when I was like, okay, everything came together, and this is a damn good movie. It does not overstay its welcome either. It's a pretty short film. It's only like an hour and 20 minutes or an hour and 30. It's pretty short, but it does exactly what it needs to do in that time frame. The main actress, Maika Monroe, I believe is her name. She was in It Follows. Did not even recognize her, because obviously that film came out 8 years ago, so she, you know, looks a bit different now, but she is fantastic in this lead role, so definitely recommend this. Not many people have been talking about it. Definitely check it out. In number 6 spot, I have The Menu. So The Menu is probably the one film on this list that a lot of people wouldn't consider a horror film. I would. It's kind of a horror comedy in a way, and I really like it. I'm not really one to be that into food culture, but this is completely a satire on food culture, and I don't think you really have to know that much about it or be interested in food culture to still get a lot of entertainment value out of this, but it's just bonus points for people who do know a lot about that. I love the message of the film. It's pretty much just showing that we need a bigger emphasis on passion for cooking as opposed to just the presentation of it, because the whole film, they go to this island to try out these different meals, and they care so much about like these messages and these cool presentations, and it's never really just about, is the food good? Does it taste good? Is it made with passion? Is it made with care? And I just absolutely love how they present that message. The 2 lead roles in this film, we have Anya Taylor-Joy as well as Ralph Fiennes. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. probably some of my favorite performances in horror this year. They kill it. There's a couple back and forth between these two characters that are just really engaging. And it's really funny. Like I said, it's a horror comedy. It is easily one of the funniest movies of the year. I would probably say it is the funniest movie, probably the most I laughed. There was one scene in particular that I think had me just completely cracking up for a solid couple seconds afterwards. So I definitely recommend this one if you haven't seen it already. It's even better going into it not knowing it's a horror film, but I'm sure most people probably do know that. Number 5 is going to be Barbarian. So Barbarian is one that also you should go into it not really knowing much about it. A lot of these films you really shouldn't know much about it going into it. I definitely think horror is the one genre where not watching trailers benefits it the most out of any other genre. So definitely go into this without knowing anything about it. It's a very unpredictable film. That's why it works so well, because it completely changes your perception of what this film is about to be. You're expecting it to be one thing when you go into it, and then it ends up being something completely different. I love the classic feel of this film as well. It doesn't really feel like it was a film made today. It really does feel like it was made in the past, not because of the effects not being up to par with today's standards, but I mean because of just the story it's telling. It feels like a story I would see from an 80s horror film, not from something made today, because that's just how wacky and even in some ways campy it can be. It's not too campy, but it gets a little campy in some points, and I think it really works. It has a lot of classic horror tension to it. A lot of, like, they don't rely too much on the jump scares. A lot of it is more just on really creepy moments that kind of just slowly build up to something. It almost feels like a Wes Craven movie in some ways. Like, I really do feel like if this movie came out like 20 years ago and I had no idea who directed it, I would probably jump to assuming it was Wes Craven. That's just what it feels like. And Wes Craven's a phenomenal horror director, so of course that's a positive. And I like the characters in this because they are quite complex. You don't really fully know everything about them right as you get introduced to them. You kind of have to learn about them as the movie goes along, and a couple of them in particular, you really don't know anything about them, and you're really trying to just guess who they are just based on their social interactions with other characters, or even just the way they do things on their own. I think my only issue with this is kind of similar to Nope. I don't think the third act really hit the landing. I think this definitely could have been my favorite of the year if the third act was much stronger, but I just think it went in a direction that I was like, well, I don't really know if I like this as much as I like the first 2 acts. And some of the character decisions were quite mind-boggling, I will say. In number 4 spot, I have Pearl. So Pearl is the type of movie that I think is my favorite type of movie, or at least one of my favorite types of movies, because, you know, you have genres, but you also have subgenres, and I would consider this a whole nother subgenre. I would call it the subgenre of a psychological character study. So think of movies like Joker, American Psycho, Black Swan. All of these movies kind of fit in that realm where it's focusing on a main character who really has a lot of different mental illnesses going on, a lot of mental issues, and they clearly are not in a good state of mind. And maybe they kill people, maybe they do other things, whatever it may be. I love those character study type films, and Pearl is 1000% one of those films. And I love how much it stands apart from X. You do not need to watch X to watch Pearl. I think Pearl is great to give more context to X, but there's really no reason that you have to watch Pearl in order to enjoy X, or you don't have to watch X to enjoy Pearl. They definitely stand on their own. Mia Goth is incredible in this. I would say without a doubt the best horror performance of this year, probably one of the best performances in general. She just nails it as this incredibly crazy character. She does have quite a sympathetic story though, because she's dealing with a very awful house situation where her mother is very abusive to her, and she just wants to be a star. She doesn't want to live on this farm. She doesn't want to do all this. She just wants to be a star. That's all she cares about. And she doesn't really get to do that, so then she starts killing people. That's pretty much the film, but there is so much more to it, so much little nuance to different moments, and the 1918 aesthetic to this film is just glorious. It feels like it was made for that time. I always think it's very impressive when films are able to take place in the past and make it feel just like that time period almost perfectly, in terms of the music and the colors and the way they talk. Everything's just on point. The movie is really colorful too. I think this is probably one of the most vibrant films I have ever seen in my entire life. It is just so glorious to look at. Amazing. Only issue I have with this, I kind of wish the movie went even crazier with this concept, because they do kind of cut it short, and I kind of would have liked to have seen her do maybe a couple more things on top of what she already did in the film. I think that could have made it even better. But overall, solid movie. definitely deserves to be in this spot. In number 3 spot, I have the most surprising movie of this year, and that is Smile. So Smile was insanely creepy. Like, this is probably the scariest movie of this year, I would say. I'm not one to get like scared by horror films that often, but if I were to say which one's the scariest, I think Smile deserves that spot. It was a really creepy film, and it wasn't relying on cheap jump scares. There were a couple of jump scares, but they were effective, but it was not relying on that. There's plenty of moments where they just show a character just doing something, like something as simple as a character smiling is enough to just send shivers down your spine. The way this movie is able to do that is just really impressive. The concept itself is not very original. We've seen plenty of films like this where there's some kind of curse that goes from person to person and it kills each person as it goes along. But the way they use this curse is very different than I've seen in other ones because of how horrific it is to real life tragedies. Without spoiling it, the way the curse works in this film is it essentially just makes the person smile all creepily, and they go completely insane before deciding to end their life. And it is absolutely horrific. And even just that opening scene with the main character played by Sosie Bacon, which Kevin Bacon's daughter, by the way, I didn't know that before watching this, but I learned that right after watching it. And even just that opening scene where she sees a psychologist and she's just kind of like talking to one of her patients, and it's just so creepy how it's shot and the way the characters are explaining the things they're going through, and it's just like really fucked up. And the person who witnesses that is the person who then gets the curse, and just this journey of this main character trying to solve this curse, trying to figure it out, how to get past it. I think this movie could have been the best horror of the year if they had a better conclusion. I do feel like the conclusion wasn't the way I wanted it to conclude, because there were two very predictable ways they could have ended this, and unfortunately they do go with one of those two ways. I kind of wish they found a third option. That would have been kind of hard, I guess, but they would have found some interesting, clever way to write it. But I feel like when there's two predictable ways for something to end, I would much prefer it to end in a completely unpredictable way, as long as it was well written and it fit the film, of course. But I definitely recommend this film. It deserves a lot of the praise it was getting. Like I said, it was very surprising because the trailers, honestly, they look okay, but they didn't look like it would be that great. But when you actually watch it, yeah, it's damn good. In number 2 spots, Terrifier 2. So this one I'm very in minority on. I don't think many people are putting Terrifier 2 this high up on their horror films ranking. Definitely not seeing many people do this, but I don't know what it was. I loved this movie completely. Like, I think a big part of it was just what it was able to do, how impressive it was, because it has such a low budget compared to all these other films, and it was just able to put out something that I think was so high quality, and you can tell there was so much care and passion put into this project. And I wasn't a big fan of the first film. I thought the first film was kind of crappy. I thought it had really amazing practical effects, really great gore, and it was slightly entertaining, but it had a terrible story, terrible characters, terrible acting. Everything was pretty bad. It was just nice practical effects. You know, that was all I really liked about the first one. But then the second one comes around, and I was fully expecting it to be the same deal, but no. There was genuinely a decent story there. Was the story amazing? No, of course not. It wasn't incredible. It wasn't the best story I've ever seen in my entire life, but it had a story. It had something it was going for. It didn't fully execute it because, of course, there's going to be a third one, and they're going to continue the story they were telling in this one. But I like that they were actually giving a backstory to Art the Clown. They were actually giving some kind of story there rather than just having it be this random slasher that just kills people and that be the whole film. Because I don't like that idea that slashers have to be mindless. They don't have to be mindless. You can have a good story there, and this one is at least trying to do something with its story, and I really appreciate that way more than I did in anything they tried to do in the first one. The characters are actually pretty great. Sienna might just be one of my favorite final girls of all time, to be honest. I mean, she's awesome in this, and I do like the supernatural direction they go with the story, because I normally don't like that. I normally don't like supernatural aspects being included in a story that already existed for a bit. Like, we already had the first one. There really wasn't anything that supernatural in that one, but then this one comes around and it's just full on supernatural. Like, they go all in for it. This guy is not human at all. They have like Nightmare on Elm Street-esque elements to it, even with that one sequence, which I thought was an incredible scene, by the way. And I actually like that direction. I think it makes it more interesting. It makes it set itself apart from other slashers. So I actually appreciated it. The gore, like I said, just for the first one was incredible, but it was even better. I know it's not for everyone. Not everyone's gonna like the gore. I get it. I like it. I think it adds a lot to it. It really just shows how god awful death can be. Some of it is comical. Sure, it's so over the top that yes, it can seem comical in some instances, especially that one bedroom scene, but I think that's kind of the appeal they're going for, and I personally think it works. The aesthetic of this is amazing. The 80s music, the 80s color scheme, that's definitely what they were going for. Even though it's not set in the 80s, it completely feels like an 80s project because of that. And it just, to me, feels like a classic horror film. It's definitely going for a classic slasher appeal. It's a very long film, and some people have the issue with it being too long. I honestly didn't have an issue with that because there wasn't a single second of this film where I was bored. And so if this 2-hour and 20-minute movie is able to never make me feel bored, then it's doing something right. But in the number 1 spot is going to be Scott Derrickson's The Black Phone. So this is the only film on this list, as I was saying in the beginning, that it actually came out in 2021 in certain places. I guess maybe it was in a film festival. I'm not exactly sure, but it came out in the United States in 2022 theatrically, so that's where I'm going to be including it today. This film is really amazing. It's not my favorite horror film out there, obviously. It's just my favorite of this year, but it's really great. So this film essentially just tells the story of this character named the Grabber, played by Ethan Hawke, and very scary character for sure. And he essentially just kidnaps kids. That's pretty much his thing. We're not sure exactly what he does to them. They don't really go too in depth with that because that could be way darker than the movie really needs to be. But they definitely die at the very least, because a lot of kids have died before from this person. So whatever he does to them, he does end up killing them. And the main character of this, I believe his name was Finney, he gets taken, and we see it from the eyes of him being stuck in this basement of the Grabber's house, and he's just trying to escape. That's pretty much the whole film. He's just trying to get out of there. It's just a full-on survival film of him trying to escape from captivity. And what's really cool is that they have this just really grounded element. Like, that in and of itself is a real thing. There are fucked up people out there who will kidnap children and do shit like that. So it's a really real and grounded thing. But then it implements a supernatural element of the children's ghosts. So the kids who used to be in there before and died, their ghosts are still there. And it's very creepy the way they deliver it. They deliver it through the phone. That's the whole point of the film, the black phone. And these kids, the ghosts, are talking to him. They're talking to the kid that got kidnapped and basically giving him advice on how to escape. And they've all been there. They've all dealt with it. So they've all had different ways of trying to escape. And they all give little bits of advice, and all those little bits of advice are used in the film in some way, shape, or form for him to try to escape. I think it's a brilliant story. It's brilliantly told. I think Scott Derrickson is definitely one of the best horror directors out there. I didn't love his other horror films, but there's definitely something about them that they all feel very grounded, but then they also tend to have a supernatural element to it as well. That's just what he does for some reason. That's just like his thing, is take a grounded element, but add a little bit of supernatural elements to it. And it makes for a very creepy film because, like again, it's a real concept, but add in some ghosts and it makes it 10 times scarier. The 70s setting is amazing in this film. They really explore the 70s perfectly. Like I said, it's always very impressive for films to go in the past and be able to make it feel like it actually is in the past, but they do it pretty much perfectly here. So that is going to do it for my top 10 horror films of 2022. Up next, I'm going to be doing my top 10 films in general of 2022. So that includes horror or any other films that came out this year. I'm also going to be doing my top 10 most anticipated movies of 2023. And I will be doing a full tier ranking of every single film from 2022 that I personally watched, likely on a live stream. So we'll probably do that sometime in early January. So that'll be quite fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Give me your rankings in the comment section below. I will see you all in my next one. Peace out.